Well, welcome to Sounds of the Season, our Sunday morning studies for Advent 2020. And we are going to look at some hymns and carols for the season and what they mean for us as we move through the next 4 weeks leading into Christmas. Of course, Joy to the World is so iconic, and you find it in so many places during this time of year on the radio, perhaps on your playlist at home, in television shows, and of course in our churches um, and in some movies. I have to admit, when I thought of Joy to the World for Advent 2020, there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance in my brain, and of course we need joy into the world, and we'll talk about that as we go through the go through this lesson. Um, but I do want to have just a little bit of fun with you here at the beginning of this lesson. Let me move over here. I apologize for being so clunky with the technology. So let me pull up this movie clip for you. That if you think of the arrangement you just heard a little clip of, that was John Rutter's arrangement of Joy to the World, a very Handelian arrangement, meaning he is pointing towards a little head nod towards Handel and Handel's Messiah. And we'll talk about that and how that relates to Joy to the World. It's a very clever arrangement, actually, by John Rutter. So if you think of that as, you know, the meme, how it started, maybe that's how it started. And here in my brain is how's it going right now, Joy to the World, in the midst of a pandemic and 2020.
You want to hurry this up, Clark? I'm freezing my baguettes off. 250 strands of lights, 100 individual bulbs per strand for a grand total of 25,000 imported Italian twinkle lights. 25,000.
Well, I hope nobody I know drives by and sees me standing in the yard staring at the house in my pajamas.
If they know your dad, they won't think anything of it.
Fire it up, Dad!
I dedicate this house to the Griswold family Christmas.
Oh.
Drum roll, please. Drum roll.
Oh,
Joy to the world. Beautiful, Clark.
Well, that is how's it going, right? I think we all feel that. It's a little bit of a cynical thought and take on our current condition, our current shape in the world with the pandemic, with the economic status of so many, the kind of gloomy outlook that we all face as we continue to wait and move through these days for some kind of medical intervention. And it appears that there's hope on the horizon. What's interesting about Joy to the World, besides its history and its context, and I'll give you more of that in just a moment. Isaac Watts wrote the hymn text, Joy to the World. Isaac Watts was born in 1674. The plague was occurring all around at that point. It actually occurred in London several years before he was born, around 10 years or so. So it was definitely on his mind and his worldview. In fact, Joy of the World was written in 1719, and a year later there was a plague outbreak in France that killed several thousand. And Watts actually wrote some hymns on the plague and disease and how that fit with his theological imagination at that point. So Joy to the World was written, as I just said, in 1719. Let me pull up some notes for myself here to give you a sense of its context and its meaning. Let me tell you first just a little bit about Isaac Watts. Isaac Watts is the, well, my computer is not cooperating. Thank you very much. Isaac Watts is really the father of English hymnody. He was he grew up in a home of descendants. They were dissidents. They were dissident and against the Church of England. And his father was a preacher. Isaac Watts was his name as well. He was in jail, actually, by the time Isaac was born. And Isaac Watts grew up in that kind of framework around his faith. His group was definitely influenced by Calvinism and what became known as the Congregational Church and tradition. Isaac Watts has wrote perhaps around 750 texts, give or take a few. You know many of his hymns: Jesus shall reign wherever the sun, our God, our help in ages past. When I survey the wondrous cross, I sing the mighty power of God. My shepherd will supply my need, and so forth. Isaac Watts really became, he really set it really set a new hymn style, writing of hymn text that were singable, that rhymed, that were more poetic than the kind of psalm singing that was occurring in his day. He actually complained of this at a young age, particularly to his father, and his dad challenged him to write something new, something that would become something better, and he did, and created quite the controversy because people wanted to sing just the actual text to the Psalms, and it didn't rhyme. It evidently created some very poor congregational singing, wasn't very inspirational. This was noted by people of primary sources of the day, and we can look back and see that these things were not very well written or done. And Isaac Watts changed hymn writing and changed congregational singing. So the German Lutherans were already doing this kind of thing about 100 years earlier, but within Isaac Watts' tradition, he changed the game, and his hymns and his style of hymn writing was carried over to the colonies and into the United States. The Wesleys were greatly influenced by Isaac Watts and his writing. So let me also give you now a little history to the hymn, and let me close this out and get to my notes here with many thanks in reference to Dr. Michael Hahn, who taught for decades at the Perkins School of Theology and whom I now study with as part of my doctoral program. Very knowledgeable about the hymns of our faith. And so he has written extensively on carols and hymns, and one is Joy to the World. So what I share with you comes from him. So let me reiterate Watts's importance as a hymn writer. One thing he would do is take Psalms and turn them and point them towards the work of Christ in the New Testament and in the Gospels, I should say. And so Psalms for him did not stand on their own as text that were written by David and for the Hebrew people and their worship and their journey, but more they pointed towards Christ. And so he paraphrased these Psalms, and sometimes they weren't just paraphrases, they were really more inspired by. And so Joy to the World is inspired by Psalm 98. And of course, there's a little reference to Genesis 3 in Joy to the World about as far as the curse is found. And we'll look at Psalm 98 in just a minute. But Watts was really famous for taking Psalms, paraphrasing them, and kind of Christianizing them. And that's what he did here with Psalm 98 and writing Joy to the World. So the history and creation of Joy to the World actually, as you know it, actually occurred over about 100 years. Watts wrote the original text, what we have today, and then it gets paired up with an English tune that was already around, Antioch, and was sung to this tune, which is later modified by someone else who we'll talk about in a minute. What's interesting is a lot of times Joy to the World, the tune itself that we have, is attributed to Handel. And that's not the case. There are a couple of snippets in here that were basically sampled, to use a modern term, were borrowed from Messiah. And we're going to listen to those. I'm going to point those out to you so you have that. Handel and Watts were contemporaries. They were in London at the same time. However, they, as far as we know, they never paired up and wrote anything together. And so we're going to take a listen to this. Let me just get to my notes here. So what you're going to hear is the opening bars for the chorus in Messiah, Lift Up Your Heads, is the original part of Joy to the World. Joy to the world, that part, just those notes, comes from Lift Up Your Heads. And so you're going to hear that. And then also the instrumental portion of the opening tenor recitative, Comfort Ye, is the little snippet for heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. You're going to hear that as well. So let me jump over here to all of my tabs that are opened up and do a little screen sharing for you. So again, I apologize for everything being so clunky, but here we go. So here is the sample from Lift Up Your Heads. And again, this is the first part of Joy to the World, just the opening motif. There you hear it. Lift up your heads, joy to the world. And so that's a borrowed, sampled piece of Messiah that is found in Joy to the World. And then if we, let me now move over to the next example, just to give you a little bit of, let's see. Let me make sure. Okay, sorry about that. Here we go. So here is the opening portion of Comfort Ye with the instrumental introduction. And let me share this with you. Thanks for your patience. And it's really slow here, so you'll have to listen for and heaven and nature sing, that part. And that figure keeps coming back within this recitative. I'll let it play just a little longer. There it is. All right, you can listen to that on your own. But I wanted to provide a little musical context for you. So you can correctly say, no, Joy to the World was not written by Handel. It actually was, there was an existing tune that was later modified with snippets from Handel's Messiah. Now, who was this who put all these pieces together? This old tune that was probably not written down. It was orally passed on, but then these snippets from Messiah were brought into the tune. This person is Lowell Mason. He was in Boston. He was born in 1792 and died in 1872. He's really the father of music education in America. He was a church musician and did a number of things in his life to promote singing, congregational singing, and bringing in some of the Western classical music into the church. But Mason was he was a musician, obviously, and he published his own arrangement of Handel's melodic fragments, and he named this tune Antioch. And so that's a little bit of the history of the music itself. And Isaac Watts' tune finally gets its tune that Isaac Watts' text finally gets its tune that we know and that we sing here, and is really kind of the dominant tune. Ironically, the tune itself, Antioch, with the text, Watts's text, remains unknown in Great Britain. They don't use that in churches. Most of them don't. So very interesting. And then one other piece of interest musically is this idea of a fuging tune, which comes from William Billings, who was very influential in American music and singing in colonial days. He was born in 1746 and died in 1800. But where you have the repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy, that piece, one section of people singing with another section of people in rapid succession, repeating the same words, was a technique called the Fuging Tune. And it was a really unique treatment by William Billings, and became a technique throughout the 19th century in hymnody as well. Kind of a rollicking way to sing. And so what's interesting, as Michael Hahn notes, is one of our favorite Christmas hymns, which was never intended to be a Christmas hymn, and we'll talk about that in just a second, is based on an Old Testament psalm. It's set to musical fragments composed in England and finally pieced together across the Atlantic in the United States. And there's 4 people here involved, right? So Isaac Watts, Handel, Lowell Mason, and finally William Billings, with it's Mason who picks up on Billings and repeats those fragments within the final tune. So all very fascinating in terms of the musical setting of it. As I just alluded to, it never was intended to be a Christmas carol or hymn. And let's take just a minute, if we can. Let me share quickly here. There we go. Psalm 98. So let's take a look at Psalm 98. And this is what Watts used to write the text. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm have gotten him victory. The Lord has made known his victory. He has revealed his vindication in the sight of the nations. He has remembered his steadfast love and faithfulness to the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the victory of our God. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Break forth into joyous song and sing praises. Sing praises to the Lord with the lyre and the sound of melody, with trumpets and the sound of the horn. Make a joyful noise before the King, the Lord. Let the sea roar and all that fills it, the world and those who dwell in it. Let the floods clap their hands. Let the hills sing for joy together before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness and the peoples with equity. So out of that, Isaac Watts gets joy to the world. And let's move quickly over to the joy to the world text. So we can see, if I can pull it up for you, there it is. And let me share the screen. There we go, that should be it. So let's take a look now. After reading Psalm 98, we have these 4 stanzas written by Isaac Watts. And are they about Advent? Are they about the birth of Jesus Christ going into Christmas? Well, no, they weren't intended that way. The end of Psalm 98, you have this kind of judgment. And for Isaac Watts, this was the second coming of Christ. And so the text here is referring to the return of Christ, the reign of Christ as king over the world. And we see this throughout this stanza. Of course, in the third stanza is really more of a point towards Genesis 3 and creation, and Adam and Eve and the curse that can be found far around the world. And so what was key for Isaac Watts in this text was this conquering of the human condition, of Jesus coming back, where all the earth, all the nations would sing for joy, would make that joyful noise as Christ comes to reign with truth and grace and righteousness and the wonders of his love. Now, isn't that perhaps a hopeful message for us as we live in the middle of this pandemic? I think what's important, and if you can see my cursor, if not, it's fine, is right here. And I want to focus right here. Stanza 1, joy to the world, the Lord is come. This sometimes is corrected, and you'll hear recordings um, or you'll hear a congregation sing, "Joy to the world, the Lord has come," right? It's got to be has come because we're singing for Christmas, right? So we're talking about the birth. No, Isaac Watts has is come. And because we know of the scripture reference, because we know from his writings and from this text that is now before us, um, he had in mind the, the not only the future work of Christ, but the current work of Christ. And this is a reference here. The Lord is come to the memorial acclamation. Um, Christ has come. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. Christ is risen. And this relates to really the season of Advent. The season of Advent in its initial Sundays looks more towards the coming of Christ as King. We just finished Christ the King Sunday. And so the texts deal with this um, coming Lord who is coming to save creation and the world. And we eventually move to the historical birth. And so there's this collapsing of time that happens in Advent. What are we talking about? Are we talking about now? Are we talking about the future? Oh, are we talking about the historical birth? What already has happened? And it's really all three of these, right? We live in this kind of collapsed time as Christians, where we remember what already has happened and what is happening now and what will happen in the future. And so here it is very significant that we recognize, joy to the world, the Lord is come. And if we had to rephrase it, we could say, Jesus has come, Jesus is come, and Jesus will come again. And so it's very significant in the days of 2020 that we balance these things together, that we remember what has already happened. Jesus has come, right? That we recognize the importance of the historical birth of Jesus, the coming of God with us, but we also recognize that Jesus is risen, that Jesus is with us, that Jesus is come before us. And in these days where there is more despair, there's more anxiety, there's more grief, there's more angst, and there's anger, it's important to remember what we're called to do. And how we're to balance this, and to also point to the hope that we can offer to people here on earth now and forevermore. And so, as we sing Joy to the World on Christmas Eve, as we sing certain stanzas, perhaps at the end of some of the services in Advent, as we typically do, we want to remember how we are to live in truth, in righteousness, and to provide those moments of wonders of love, and to look for those moments of Christ's love that goes beyond our understanding, and to surprise the world, and to offer world moments of joy in the midst of a once in a lifetime event. So in the days ahead, as we continue to move towards Christmas Day, may we find the light to be the light, to share the light of the world that provides enough illumination upon the historic events of Christmas. But more importantly, provides illumination of Jesus's work in the world through the church, through us, through you and me, and Jesus's work for the future. My prayer for us is that we continue to live in this way, and it's hard. It's hard. We might want to just put in the plug, Christmas vacation, and everything falls apart. And that's going to happen. But we might want to look towards the beauty that Christ gives us, deep beauty that gives us joy in this time of year, that we can share that with others in appropriate ways, that we can offer joy and hope for a world in need. As we leave, I want to offer 2 questions for your consideration on Sunday morning. And as I wrap up, I want to be able to share these, and then I want you to be able to hear the remainder of Handel's, of John Rutter's arrangement of Joy to the World that is very Handelian, let me put it that way. So I'm pulling that up just to have that ready to go. So here are the questions I want you to consider before I wrap up, and these we can discuss on Sunday morning. So the first question is this. In 2020, we feel like time has collapsed, right? It seems we are in a time warp. We don't know what day it is. Is it still March? I don't know, right? We have these moments. We're waiting and longing for a new day, a new year. We just can't wait. And there seems to be hope out there for next year in terms of at least the pandemic. As Christians, how does Joy to the World inform our ability to wait? Waiting is hard. But how does Joy to the World inform our ability as Christians to wait? How does it inform our commitment to work for God's kingdom now? And how does Joy to the World inspire us to serve others? And then the second question, how does Advent help us live into the tension between the already and the not yet? These are points of discussion. I hope you find this discussion meaningful. I hope you found what I have shared today at least somewhat interesting. Maybe some of it's new to you in terms of its context, but hopefully, more importantly, it's inspiring and meaningful to you as you move through the first part of the season and into the rest of December. So I will close by sharing the final portion of John Rutter's arrangement of Joy to the World. Enjoy. Thank you for joining me online. I will see you online as well, or perhaps in our sanctuary over the next 4 Sundays. I wish you well. I wish you a meaningful and a full Advent of anticipation and discernment as we continue to walk in these days of 2020. Know you are loved and know that you are being prayed for. Thank you.